This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. This week, Emmet and John Morrison discuss Wonder Woman. She's been presented as both a symbol of feminism and eye candy for men, sometimes simultaneously. Which is it? Are the various recent takes on her by Greg Rucka, George Perez, Grant Morrison, and so forth really all that different from each other? They'll particularly touch on Wonder Woman Earth 1 by Grant Morrison and Yanick Paquette. And yes, I'm just here as producer and MC this week, which includes reminding you how you can help this podcast. You can make your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra and helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of presenting this show every week. You can also support us by becoming a patron at patreon.com/deconcomics. Or make a one-time donation via PayPal. Send it to donate@deconstructingcomics.com.
Hello everyone, my name is Emmet and I've got on the line Mr. John Robertson over in the States. We're going to be talking all the things Wonder Woman today, aren't we, John?
Apparently so, yes. Which is interesting, too, because she's just been in the news. Apparently her being named UN ambassador caused a bit of an uproar yesterday.
Exactly.
Did you hear about that?
Exactly. I was going to raise it because we were meant to do this a week ago, and that fell through. And then the timing just synced up beautifully because this whole farrago at the UN kicked off, and I was like, oh, well, we're doing a podcast about this on the weekend. This is going to be perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it's topical.
Exactly.
And one of the few things that doesn't involve Trump that is lately. If you could explain this to me.
Sure.
In what way is she to be an ambassador, being a fictional character? I mean, in, literature, promotional stuff, that kind of thing?
Yeah. I think
PSAs?
it's really interesting because, and we can get into this a little bit more later on, but if you look at Wonder Woman as a character idea, she was always meant to represent something. She was always meant to represent a set of values that maybe challenged the reader. So at her inception, when you got Marston Peters coming up with this character in the wake of the suffrage movement, in the wake of the rise of women's rights in the Western world, you had this notion of feminine equality, if not in Marston's suggestion was feminine superiority. So I think the UN, on the one hand, you got the UN saying, well, here is a good role model for women around the world. On the other hand, you got the UN going, hey, we've attached ourselves to this franchise, which is going to have a movie coming out. There's going to be a lot of marketing. We're going to get in on this. So there's two sides to it. It's the UN actually getting a lot of good press by attaching themselves to something which they see as popular, and somebody's done some great work in getting them on board there. Somebody at Warner's marketing department deserves their bonus. And on the other hand, I think there is some genuine sincerity where people are saying, no, Wonder Woman is a positive role model for women and for men, that you've got a woman character who is strong and people will admire. So I'm a little hesitant to second guess what really is going on here, but it's very interesting, and it's something that lends itself perfectly to Wonder Woman, who has always been about something more than the comics managed to actually describe. Does that make sense to you?
And has always been a little slippery.
Yeah.
In that, well, the thing about her, and what I find looking through her history, such as it is that she's always been difficult. Because the thing is that there are these contradictory elements to what she was conceived as. that don't sometimes seem to fit together so well. And that was actually part of the problem with the UN this week, as I understand it, because the thing is, okay, on one hand, she represents the feminist ideal, although on the other hand, she goes around in a, what they refer to as a swimsuit.
Yes.
With huge breasts.
Yes.
And, this obvious, like, hypersexualized female ideal. And they feel that that's a little too contradictory for what they, want to present the UN as. I mean, and the thing is, that's apparently kind of been a thing all the way through. Certainly when Morrison had a hold of her. That was definitely a problem. I haven't read the entire Lepore book, but there were times where basically that he had, for instance, the amount of bondage in it criticized by feminist groups, such as they were at the time. And it was an interesting detail that I came across actually about that was that apparently he got a list of other ways of tying her up that didn't involve chains that would be acceptable. Other ways of feminine confinement. And what's interesting is that the one they liked the best was her in a straitjacket.
Really? Okay.
Which, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe the connotations might be different for me, but I mean, I equate that with feminine repression in the way it was in the real world at the time.
Yeah.
So, in one manifestation, certainly.
But what's interesting to me about the loving submission and the idea of bondage and Marston trying to get into describing that in a comic book was that for Diana, the character, in his version of the character, whenever she's bound, whenever she finds herself at the mercy of somebody, there's always an element of play acting to it. For her, it's a game because she is so superior and she is a strong woman and an Amazon. She knows she will get out of this, and she knows there's literally a panel where she's been chained up in a man's kitchen. So the setting itself alone. So she's chained in the kitchen, and the guy's like, "Oh, I've got you in your place," and all the rest of it. And she's laughing. She's enjoying it because to her, this is just ridiculous. This is absurd. Like, why would you put me in a kitchen? And number two, I'm going to get out of this in a moment. This is going to be. I am going to get out of the situation, but I'll play along because this to her. This is almost. The domestic scene is almost kinky as a sort of role play fantasy, and Marston was aware of that. I think we also need to note when it comes to the UN, the letter of complaint that's been circulated on some of the fan sites. They're talking about her having these huge breasts and these skimpy clothes and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you look at the original character and you look at the work of Peters, what's interesting about Peters is he was a pamphleteer and an artist for the suffrage movement. So he was drawing pictures of women who were being depicted as standing against the tide of abuse and whatever they were receiving at that time. And he sort of channeled that into his illustrations for Wonder Woman. And she is not overly busty, and she is not quasi-anorexic as some artists have depicted her in the past. She is actually like she's a healthy woman. She's a healthy, well-built woman, And comic art has become extremely how it depicts women is very singular in the comic book market. Whereas that's moved away from where she started as a sort of the next stage for this suffragette pamphleteer artist.
Well, and also the thing is about chains, and this actually is something she has in common with Superman, is that was a big image if you look at any number of editorial cartoons or illustrations that have to do with the progressive movement.
Yeah.
The proletarian breaking his chains, etc.
Yeah.
And certainly there's any number, and actually this is something Lepore brings up as well, which is that was certainly an image used in the feminist movement. So it's ironic that was the thing that that it was suggested to them that they remove, but that she could still be confined in some way, right? But not with chains, because apparently there was the kink aspect brought in at that point. But the thing is, of course, that was, and that actually brings me to the Morrison book, which was the origin of all of this. Now, the thing is that's what you see in the Morrison book is actually that's present in all of the Marston Peters Wonder Woman. It's like I'm thinking particularly of I guess they're having some kind of festival. I guess I hesitate to call it an orgy, but I guess that's the word. With some of the girls dressed up in deer costumes.
Yeah, that's from the Marston Peters book. Yeah.
Straight out of it, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. It's just as weird there too. Although there's something about Peters' style. To be honest, I've always found Peters' style just a little freaky. And even
what is it exactly you find freaky about it?
It's like, okay, in one of the very early ones, you get like a very classic shot of Wonder Woman's face, this sort of very of the time 30s style Cupid doll kind of face.
Yeah.
But very perfect of the period kind of graphic style. Okay, you see that, and then you see all the rest of his work, and it's so much rougher and quicker and more rushed. And it seems to fall apart like a bunch of string, I guess. That's what it looks like to me, actually. An awful lot of string. I don't know really how to describe it otherwise, but it's always bothered me because, I don't know, it's just that, I don't know, I probably have the same reaction to an awful lot of other Golden Age art because a lot of it really is very rushed and not completely coherent looking. Some Peters stories are better than others. I remember one in particular, I think it was the first Cheetah story.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, a sequence where she's in some kind of tank of water and she's tied up and she has to get out basically by her teeth, which happened a lot. She used her teeth a lot. And I remember liking that, but at the same time finding it kind of weird the way that the mask looked with the mouth bitten out of it. And it's only something I understood later when I grew up. And it was like, that is what he meant by that. And the thing is that I don't know. It's like as a kid's comic. I mean, the thing is, I do stuff that depends on women's sexiness. Okay, the comics I do.
Yep.
Both back when I was doing adult stuff, and now when I'm doing more R-rated stuff, Lulu or Susie Spreadball or whatever. I mean, I can't claim to not take advantage of this sort of thing myself, obviously. It's just that this stuff was for children, and one has to wonder about that sort of thing. I mean, it's like something like the Phantom Lady was not actually really meant for kids. It was meant for I guess at the time they would have thought of them as subliterate adults, but adults nevertheless, Whereas Wonder Woman was in fact meant for kids to read. And on one hand you have this empowerment message, on the other hand you have all this stuff about submission. I guess I'm wondering, in your view, what exactly did Marston think when it was coming to this concept of submission as it exists in this?
Yeah, well,
because I've never really been able to get my mind around this. I've drawn S&M stuff and I still can't get my mind around it.
He was a public figure. He was very much on the national stage as I think he was a psychiatrist. I can never tell if it's psychiatrist or psychoanalyst, but I think he was a psychiatrist. But he was talking about sexuality, and he was talking about women's rights, and he was talking about the suffrage movement. But then he's also talking about his understanding of sexual role play. And what you need to bear in mind is here is somebody who is working in this space, who's speaking on these issues in the wake of Freud and everyone who came after Freud. And now...
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, we're very much counter-religious, counter-conservative. These are seen as radical ideas. And here you've got this individual who is chasing fame, who very much enjoys having his name in lights, and he's talking about all these things, and he has this relationship with his wife, Anne Olive, and his student, where they are indulging in role play and bondage and submission and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the point you raise about how could this be for kids, I think that was very deliberate. I think it is meant for kids in that it is empowering and you've got a strong woman, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which we still hold to. We still say this is what the book is about. But it's also hinting at sexuality in such a way that an adult reading it will pick it up because maybe they're familiar with the style of like Alan Moore's digression into Tijuana Bibles in Watchmen. I'd never heard of a Tijuana Bibles before I read Watchmen. But this blue movies and pornography and etc., that was something an adult would be aware of. But a child, while not necessarily aware of them, would be maybe unconsciously gaining an understanding. This is his project. Unconsciously gaining a more healthy appreciation for sex as enjoyment, sex as playful. And I think that's what Wonder Woman is about. And if we look at the Wonder Woman Earth 1 book, which, as you say, we originally wanted to talk about this months ago when it first came out, but Grant Morrison and Yanick Paquette are trying to update all of these ideas for today. And Paquette has these supermodels running around on this incredibly detailed Paradise Island. So you've lost that disposable Peter's art. This is a work of art. This is stunning stuff. He's done all this background detail. It looks beautiful. When a child...
Well, the one thing I don't have any problem whatsoever with the Earth 1 book is Yanick Paquette's art.
It's stunning, yeah.
I mean, his stuff... And the thing is, he's actually, I think he benefited quite a lot from that brief time he was on Swamp Thing, which otherwise I didn't particularly like. But he was like embracing this sort of more organic kind of layout, which seemed to actually be taking an awful lot of inspiration from Bissett and Totleb and the way they would do their layouts. And he seems to be still carrying that over at this point. And I mean, the pages are just fucking beautiful. It's like the layouts are this like a hair shy of J.H. Williams kind of stuff sometimes.
Yeah.
It's just that they don't go quite as crazy as his do. But it's lovely. And I mean, art is great, but the problem I have, you brought up the supermodels thing, okay?
Yeah. That brings with it all our contemporary hang-ups with sexuality and presentation of the woman's body, and it's sort of introducing that as the Amazon ideal. And I wonder what Marston and Peters would make of the current book. I wonder how they would, because you've gone from role play and fantasy and everything to a standard of beauty that is fixed. So when the sorority girls rock up, Etta Candy, they're like, oh, she's disgusting, she's revolting, what's wrong with her? You know, whereas Etta Candy in the original is actually a celebration of gluttony, a celebration of greed. You know, you can do whatever you want to your body. The contrast.
Although she is also comic relief, though.
Yes.
She's one of these any number of comic relief sidekick characters that you see. That DC and All-American Comics characters had in the 40s. I guess the most famous horrible name for one of them would be Percival Pop the Super Cop. I think that was the Spectres. She was one of those. But they all had this for some weird reason. Only Batman avoided that because he had the child. And that was an exclusive relationship. But other than that, and she was. And the thing is that. She, on the one hand, was totally proud of what she was. On the other hand, the reader was invited to laugh at her at the same time.
Yeah.
And I've always found Etta Candy weird for that very reason, actually. Yeah. Now, Morrison's Etta Candy, on the other hand, I understand that some people have compared her to some Rebel something.
Rebel Wilson. She's an Australian actress. Rebel Wilson. Yep.
Yeah, an actress who I've never seen in anything. So
wow!
I don't watch an awful lot of contemporary Hollywood movies. I don't care for them. But so I mean, would that be a fair comparison though?
I think the other name I heard was Beth Ditto. who's I think she's a singer, and she had this whole, she was sort of leading this movement of within the popular culture. This is a notion of fat positivity, and she was given as an example of that. I am happy with my body, I enjoy my body, and your standard of beauty doesn't apply to me. And I thought that's what Etta Candy in this current version is also referencing, this notion of a public figure who is not ashamed to be fat, And I think that it's sort of trading on that, and he's getting into these ideas of body shaming there, and these notions of women's body as something that is a commodity versus something that is an actual personal experience of the physical world, like an individual's experience of the world as their body. And then somebody else is saying, well, you're not marketable, you're not acceptable to us because our notion of beauty has a price tag and you don't fit that notion of beauty. It's really interesting stuff, but I wonder if it's captured by the book. I wonder if the book actually successfully delivers a lot. We communicated briefly about this a week ago, because I told you I reread Earth 1, and I found it a lot more enjoyable the second time. But I do remember.
And why was that?
I think because I've read it all the way, I know where it's going. I think I had a lot more time for the art this time. I was experiencing Paquette a lot more. I am not an artist. I'm not an artist. I'm a writer. I read the words. I don't think I have a very fair appreciation for a lot of comic book art. And I was reading the comic for Morrison's take, because we were promised this would be the definitive take on Wonder Woman. And I was coming away from it going, he's trying to address all these different issues. I wish he'd pick one. I feel... what are you talking about? Is this about Morrison's kinky allegory? Is this about feminism? Is this about counter-feminism? Is this about the commodifying of the woman's body? And the second time I read it, I just enjoyed the art, and all that background noise, that just became background noise to me. I was like, oh, whatever, it looks pretty. Which I don't know if that's ideal.
See, my reaction is very problematic altogether with it. Because, okay, here's the thing about Morrison, is that Morrison's doesn't just comprise the Marston version.
Yes.
It also comprises the Perez version.
Yes.
Specifically, the origin of the Amazons as Amazons.
Yes.
Comes straight from George Perez, that was not present and could not really probably have been present in the same way in Marston. Yep. Because basically Perez's, and I guess Len Wein, but as I understand it, it was basically Perez's story, and Len Wein just wrote it, but it was Perez's plot and everything. Yep. So the idea was that they'd been raped. Specifically, Hippolyta had been enslaved and raped by Hercules. And there's an additional thing too, which came recently with the Azzarello version. A lot of people had a lot of problems with this, despite the fact that it really did have beautiful fucking art. Chang, I love that. Stunning, yeah. But the best looking version of Diana I've ever seen, because she's a big biker bruiser chick. Yeah. She's still feminine, but she is also like tough without overdoing it. It's the perfect balance of everything. But what they brought in was the idea that she was not formed out of clay, but in fact was the child of, in Azzarello is Zeus, and in Morrison it's Hercules, the guy who raped her mother. Yep. And when we see it, and the beginning actually carries an awful lot of what my problem is with the rest of it. And the thing is that doing the kind of cartooning I do, I can recognize a few things that is going on in there that makes it a little bit more problematic. And before I mention this, let me, by way of comparison, let me backtrack to something else, which is Mad Max Fury Road. Okay. Which I think has a number of the same issues. Right. And mentioning my issues with that might clarify my issues with this. Mm-hmm. So the thing about Mad Max Fury Road is that it's all hyped and received by people as this big feminist empowerment statement, and very well may be, and certainly women I know see it that way, and who am I to say otherwise? At the same time, A, it's made by men.
Yep.
As is this. Now, B, the thing I have a problem with is that, so basically the idea is that he's saving 5 supermodels. That they are the valuable women to save, or that Furiosa, in fact, is saving these 5 supermodels. And Furiosa, basically, apart from having grease on her head, is kind of one herself, after all. And it's like you see other women at the very beginning of the movie, the milkers.
Yep.
You know, the big fat women who are being kept basically to be milked. They're literal
broodmares. They're literally like being treated like almost like farm animals in this.
Yes, exactly.
Setup. Yeah.
And not a single one of them is saved or brought away because they're not basically presented or treated as human. And I have to say, not that I was particularly interested in the milkers exactly. It's just that I sit there and wonder, but these are women being treated as property.
Yep. But do you not see maybe Furiosa's plan, and maybe the motivation behind it is to hurt him most by taking his brides, and maybe that will set in motion. Like, this is the revolutionary act, is to actually take away the most prized women, the most prized piece of his property, rather, take them away as a deliberate FU to the dictator, and then his regime collapses. I mean, this is what sets in motion everything going wrong for him. And that's deliberate.
Which makes it a revolutionary statement, but not a feminist one.
You see, I think it's...
Particularly anyway.
The feminist element of Mad Max, because people are really trying to parse it for what is or isn't feminist. And look, that's useful as a discussion. But I think for me, the feminist aspect is the critique of, in this regime, in this world where everything is reduced to you need water to live, women will still be dominated and exploited. And that's the feminist critique. It's like, why are they being treated differently? Why are women being treated in this way? Why do the brides exist? Why are they there? And I think if you explore that, you can maybe get more of a understanding of it as a feminist critique. Then I saw there was a lot of discussion about the film in relation to, well, they're being routinely raped, so how can this be feminist? And I was going, well, no, the existence of rape within the world does not preclude it as empowerable. It's actually empowering to the viewer to go, yeah, wait a minute, why is this immediately where this society would go? This is screwed. Okay, we need to do something about that in the here and now, and that's its purpose as a feminist text, to instruct the viewer to go, actually, this is crap. Why do we put up with this? That's how I would come at it. And I think you raising it in relation to Wonder Woman is very useful because, again, we talk about Wonder Woman as feminist, and usually that typically means she's perfect and she's a mother figure, she's a sister figure, she's all these things. But she can't be a character. She can't make mistakes because that wouldn't be fair, and then she wouldn't be feminine. That's rubbish. I mean, she can be a realized character and still be feminist.
Morrison has had this problem with her actually traditionally. He used to say he didn't particularly like her as a character. When he was doing JLA, I mean, basically the whole whenever she appeared, the whole idea was, wow, she's awesome because she's awesome. You even had characters sometimes almost pretty much say that.
Yeah.
And she had absolutely no personality whatsoever. I'm not totally sure she really has much here. But the thing is that, okay, just to finish up with Fury Road, I would draw your attention to one thing in particular. Now,
sure.
There's a tactic that men use sometimes when dating in modern times. I've used it myself, which is that they will basically try to seduce a woman by acting feminist.
Yep.
talking feminist,
The would-be feminist ally. Yep.
flattering feminism,
Yep.
and so forth.
Yep.
Whether you are or not, the point is, it goes along with the sensitivity thing, which women see through, but sometimes they're willing to play along with because they feel sorry for you. I guess I don't know, but at least that would have been in my case. But the thing is that in Fury Road, we have the first time we see the bride, who, by the way, I would submit Furiosa is using as objects too. They remain objects. They remain objects of value that are being used for a purpose of hers. So, first time we see them having a little sexy open air bath in the desert with their sheer clothes, which act as sheer clothes do when they get wet. And basically, we're looking at their legs. We're looking at various parts of their body, actually.
Yep.
I guess from Max's perspective, I'm not sure, but in any case, it's certainly, from Max's angle. And now the thing is, this is sort of I submit that this coupled with the quote feminist unquote message is a sort of a have your cake and eat it too kind of situation, where you're flattering feminism to get while getting away with that. I'm not saying I have a problem with that as such. I'm saying I'm simply characterizing what it is, which is that it's a sexy time moment. Okay, I'm sorry, but looking at them like bathing that way, I'm sorry, I don't really see that as feminist as such.
Well,
I see it as very gazy.
Yeah, it is presenting you. Well, you immediately understand that they are valued objects. You immediately understand that their purpose as the brides is to be sexual objects for this dictator.
It looks like a perfume ad.
I know.
Something like that.
I know. I think that's very.
It looks like some kind of fucking perfume or vodka ad.
It's very deliberate. And then we have later on the heavily pregnant bride getting run over brutally and disposed of in this horrible fashion. And again, that contrast in your mind, you're going, well, how could they do that to her? She was both beautiful and she was about to be a mother, and that's just been run over by a car. Now that is maybe that is the purpose of that moment, to sort of just slap you upside the head and go, these are human beings. They're being traded back and forth in this way, and you enjoyed that little. I'm not talking you in person, John, but you as the audience member enjoyed this little bit of fan service.
You don't know me, Emmet. You don't know me. I very well may have experienced great joy at that moment. You don't know. I might be a completely sick bastard. But no, I'm the guy who when he saw Bambi as a kid and his mom died, screamed "It'll build character." That's me.
Yeah.
But no, the thing is to connect that up with Wonder Woman Earth 1. Okay, so you have this feminist message at the same time as you have throughout it poses. Constant poses.
Yeah, that's
from Wonder Woman and all the Amazons as cheesecakey poses, reminiscent of his of Yanick's work on Terra Obscura and stuff like that. Which, don't get me wrong, I love.
That's a really good point.
But the point is that throughout, it's like you have these words, yes, but coupled with that, it's gazy all the way through. You have many pages that are basically like posters, really, more than they are pages as such. And there's the physical perfection of all the Amazons, and yes, we're given a reason for that, but at the same time, the thing is that you don't really see them doing anything that's unglamorous. Their poses are no matter what they're doing, are never without a slight sway to the hips, a little bit of a cocked head, a little bit of the gritted teeth and bit lip and things like that, all the way through. In every single case, they're always posed that way. It's almost like you have. It's like the way people criticize the Scarlett Johansson butt shot. On the Avengers poster.
Yeah.
And you begin to wonder, okay, so again, this is a have your cake and eat it too moment, where you're basically saying, "Oh, you women are wonderful. You women are great." Click, click, click.
Yeah. I mean, I think your contrast with Mad Max Fury Road is really useful in trying to draw out, is this all deliberate in that this is a male comic book reader's idea of what a Amazon paradise utopia would look like.
Exactly. The same way that they would say this person likes to fantasize about lesbians.
Sure.
He's not fantasizing about a butch and a femme. He's fantasizing about two incredibly sexy women getting it on.
Yeah. Yes. It's the just
lipstick all the way. You know, lipstick lesbians all the way. That's the way he's using it, and that's a little like that.
It's a swimsuit calendar. It's a couple of steps away from lesbian pornography aimed at men, and that's really interesting as a comment on the reader, the assumed male reader of Wonder Woman. You know, because as you say, you would imagine if you're trying to capture feminism of today, and you're talking about an island where only women live, that there'd be a range of body types, there'd be a range of sexualities, that there'd be a range of even gender issues that you could explore on Paradise Island. But it's a very singular notion of what beauty is, and it's a very singular notion of what a woman is within a utopian setting. And that's, I think that's deliberate.
They themselves hold to. The scientist expresses a point of view that's almost a master race kind of view of it.
Sure.
Really. It's where like Yanick, she actually refers to Edda as diseased.
Yeah. And I was talking
which Edda basically says "fuck you too," but at the same time, you know that I mean she and then of course there's also, I can't remember her fucking name, her Wonder Woman's blonde lover and rival.
Yeah.
Who, when she sees Edda, refers to her and other women of man's world as domesticated cattle. So it's not like it's not. They don't really have a girl power view of things. That's really more Wonder Woman's view, but not the Amazons themselves. And I guess you could say that they're talking about a flaw in Amazon society. But what exactly is that commenting on?
I think we're almost circling it in this discussion. I think it's a comment on Wonder Woman as a comic book character. I think it's the perception of Wonder Woman as a comic book character with the assumption that men are reading her. I think that's what it's about, and I think it's trying to draw attention to that by making it absurd. Like, why do they all look like supermodels? Why isn't there more diversity in body type and shape? And why is it that they even respond to Etta Candy in such an aggressive way? And Etta Candy's sorority sisters, they all seem to be somewhat sapphic. They all seem to be enjoying each other in a way that is less staged than the orgy on Amazon and the Amazon's island. It's sort of, this is more, the sorority group is more honest because the sorority group actually is closer to what feminism has moved women to today than this fantasy of an island only inhabited by women, which is shut off and closed off from the world, closeted almost, and exists as a sexual fantasy for the male reader. I think that's where it's going, but don't quote me. Sort of.
I suppose so. And the thing is that Etta herself, which is actually quite a contrast to Morrison, in this is she is not actually a figure of fun.
Yeah.
She is a character with dignity of her own, and Morrison has traditionally actually I've noticed he has this liking of Etta because she showed up in Seven Soldiers. She was doing a panel, I believe, in the Zatanna comics. Zatanna appeared on.
Yeah.
For instance, apparently Etta was making some kind of side income from her relation to superheroes, which of course she would. So the thing is, though, that although Etta is the only one of the Holiday Girls who is personalized as a character in the dialogue, at the same time, if you look at Paquette's art, there's certainly their faces, their expressions, things like that. They're individuals in that sense, even though they're background individuals. Whereas, like I said, I mean, apart from Nubia, because she's black, all the Amazons seem to be pretty much on the same model. I suppose one reason for that might be that I guess Hercules wouldn't have picked the ugly ones, or the ones who looked less than that in the first place.
We're back at Mad Max again. They're the brides from Mad Max again.
Actually, yes, because the thing is that these are the women. Basically, these are the women who, and my God, there must have been an awful lot of them, who Hercules enslaved. So, in other words, they were selected already. But isn't that interesting that it basically means that they've adopted Hercules, taste and beliefs about women's body types.
And they commemorate him as well, because he, in this little ritual that we see Wonder Woman interrupting and distorting so she can get out of the Amazon society, the part of Hercules is constantly there. It's all constantly present. And in this little ritual, they defeat him, and Wonder Woman actually turns the tables and asserts her role as Hercules and wins, and then disrupts everything.
Yeah, and at which point defeats her rival, which, by the way, gives Morrison a chance to insert for weird moment where where right after she says, "You defeated me, my burning love."
Yeah, I actually,
let's insert this so we know that they're lovers, because we didn't get into it at any other point in the story. Let's just throw it in there in the weirdest fucking possible way. It just sounds strange.
She does mention it to she does mention it to Steve Trevor at one point, where she says, "I hope you're worth it because I've just done this to my girlfriend and she's a really good lover." And sorry, she does address it in the past.
Isn't that after what I just mentioned, though?
Oh, I thought it was before.
I think it is.
Okay, because
I can't remember if she. I mean, the thing is that the two halves of the book actually see. I mean, the funny thing is, it's hard for me to divide them without going back and looking, because they seem to go on the same arc more or less. But it's like Wonder Woman does something defiant, leaves, comes back, does something else defiant.
Well, the structure of the book is really confusing at times. For me, that actually was one of my initial problems with it. Because we are witnessing her on trial, and then we're cutting back in time to witness the testimony of the various people coming to her defense. And that, with the layouts as well, which Paquette keeps introducing pages which are they're riffing on Grecian urn, the decoration around the Grecian urn, and that's framing each panel, framing the borders of splash pages and so forth. That was really, I felt a bit discombobulated at times. So like, where are we in the story? I'm not really sure what's happening. And I don't know why that was.
The thing is, there's a certain Satanist to the layouts, and again, all that posiness.
Yeah.
That makes it hard to really distinguish pages from each other just at a glance. Which I guess that would be a flaw in the art, is that each page seems to be a bunch of pinups.
Yep.
Again, like I said, the thing is that Morrison himself, again, this is ambiguous, because you wonder sometimes if it's just flattering feminism or if it's actually feminism. And the thing is, I remember when Morrison had this in the works, and for a very fucking long time, which is strange looking at it. I'm going, really? This took that long? I mean, it's good, but I mean, it's certainly not one of his more difficult works. I don't really see, unless he was just having a trouble getting his mind around the character. But I remember he said, "I've been researching feminism."
Yeah, I wanted to
and
bring
that
this
just
up.
filled me with dread.
Yeah,
when I heard this, because it's like, what was he researching? Because I'm not sure if this is the feminism I grew up with. I grew up in the 70s.
I think
10 years
he
of
said,
my life.
He said something like, I've been researching. Was it 2,000 years of feminism? Oh, he gave a time scale for the feminine. So, like, I guess he's referring to Lesbos. He's the poet Lesbos and all that kind of stuff. But it's just kind of, can you take all of that and describe it as feminism? Does feminism capture all of that? Are you talking about the history of women in literature? Like, what does that statement mean? And I think it was an offhand remark he made, and maybe a lot of people jumped on it because I read that so many times, and I did not know what he meant. And then I read.
I'm just sitting there wondering. It's like I certainly don't see Pankhurst in here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not an all-encompassing term for what he's referring to. I don't think it actually describes the different things he seems to have been touching on in his research. And again, I think it's very much Wonder Woman as a feminist icon is fascinating because I feel as if Miss Magazine, when they featured her on the cover, Wonder Woman for President, and that whole
very
campaign,
first cover, actually.
Yeah, the very first issue. I think that was all about just making an impact. So she was reduced to a symbol to make a point that, they've depowered her, they've made her a kung fu artist instead of this powerful princess. This is another example of women being sort of put in their place and restricted and all, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you had a gay man who was writing Wonder Woman, Samuel or Delaney. The book gets taken off him. Martin Pascoe has to do some sort of quick fix. All right, we've got to give her powers back. We're going to give her... This notion of her has to be made more powerful to fit what was perceived as feminist criticism. But I think there was a confusion there because she was being...
By the way, as long as you're side point while you're mentioning it, I thought that Marty actually did a fairly good job.
I love what he did. I love the Trials of Wonder Woman. I think he did a great job picking that ball and running with it. But it was sort of an editorial mandate. Okay, we need to make her powerful again, and so he needs to junk everything that had been introduced, bring her back to this sense of this is where she should be. But now, what's it about? Because prior to the whole Miss Magazine thing, Delaney was actually trying to talk about contemporary feminism, and he was getting into issues like black feminism and white feminism and abortion, and he had all these plans. I was going, I really wanted to see where that was going, but we never will. It's never going to happen. But now we've got this would-be feminist-approved Wonder Woman, but there's a confusion between what would be a feminist Wonder Woman and what Wonder Woman's feminist potential as a symbol is. These are two separate things, and there has been this uncomfortable attempt to skip from one to the other, and I would include the Perez run in that too, ever since. And I thought Morrison had a great opportunity just to smash that all down and go, all right, what would a feminist Wonder Woman be like? And instead what he seems to have done is reflect back on us the contradictions in the depiction of feminism within the Wonder Woman comic. It doesn't actually follow as a feminist text, and he's sort of throwing that back at us and going, is this really what you want? Is this really what you think feminism is? A bunch of supermodels and a closeted island. Like, what are you talking about? And it's really, you're right. I mean, this was not what I expected. There's a lot of thought here. There's a lot of ideas sort of being bounced around. We haven't even gotten into the whole racial element with Steve Trevor yet. But
the thing is about that.
Yeah,
I like that actually.
Yeah.
I like that, especially considering that that it's actually becomes directly relevant in one of the reasons why he refuses to inform on them.
Yeah.
But also the reason why suddenly we find the problem with the bondage thing. Morrison actually uses that as an opportunity to bring up the other connotations that has.
Yeah.
And critique it.
Yeah.
Because that's like, for her, that's like a side of I'm really into you.
Yep.
And for him, it's like, no.
Yeah, this is problematic.
To say the least.
Did you hear me? I was making more points as I said it. It's problematic.
But there's other aspects of it, though, but he doesn't bring in, like, one thing I was reading in the Lepore book earlier, and I didn't realize this, but it's interesting because it seems like every character at DC in the 50s, one of their major characters was being done by someone who despised them.
Really?
Because apparently, because Robert Kanigher fucking hated Wonder Woman and did everything, and when he was assigned to Wonder Woman, deliberately was humiliating the character and degrading the character throughout the entire time he was doing it, which is why suddenly she's all like 50s Lois Lane about Steve Trevor.
Yeah.
It's much like, the way Weisinger fucking hated Superman, and it showed in his entire reign over the character. His working out his psychosexual problem with Superman. Apparently he had some problems of Superman will always be better than him. Well, of course he will, fucking moron. But apparently it's like this is something that came up with a psychiatrist, and he was working it out through that. And in Kanigher's case, Kanigher was just, from what I understand about him, he was just a hateful son of a bitch, but particularly, like a lot of DC writers, which you can just tell throughout the 50s and 60s, was a serious misogynist. It really looked down on women. There's a lot, and the thing is, in that particular case, what Wonder Woman is, it's interesting because what you're seeing is a symbol there being twisted to actually, in a way, chain the minds of women, if anything. If you look at these the way that Morrison looks at, which is that these symbols, in a way, have a psychological power over people and bring out certain things and make certain things more permissible than they are at other times, and that's the use of these symbols, that they are gods, basically, in that sense, and other crazy shit that Morrison loves to say. But this is the way he thinks of things. And I guess the Kanigher period can be looked at that way, and the thing is, he doesn't really go into that aspect of it. So I'm not sure if it's a full comment. I can see what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if that's. I don't know. Do you think that that's really something that someone reading it would get out of it without having to think about it too hard?
I think with Morrison, there's always the suspicion that he has been overthinking the project, and the book isn't we are not necessarily reading the book he is writing. So the example I always go to is his response to the criticism of Sea Guy. With Sea Guy is a fun romp. It's a fun comic book with lots of crazy ideas about what sacrifice would we be willing to make for a perfect world, and he gives that to us in the form of a world where all the superheroes are now redundant, and that is an ugly fascistic world, but it's very pleasant to live in, and really interesting stuff. He responded to some of the criticism saying, well, I find it ridiculous because they didn't realize I was doing a Grail quest. I'm thinking to myself, well, why would a reader assume it was a Grail quest? Like, that's not where my mind went. I've read Grail literature, I've read stuff on this, but I didn't take that from it. So sometimes I wonder, does he overthink it and then deliver something which the reader can intuit? We know there's a lot here, I just don't quite know what it is. And that could be useful for him, because then you have a little cottage industry of academics currently working who are able to do their theses on various comic book runs. And Grant Morrison's a God's gift because he's got a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff in there. I speak as somebody who actually had an essay published in an academic book about Grant Morrison. So, like, there is the opportunity there for people to go, I think this is about this, and I think this is about this, and I think that is about this, and they're all valid. They're all valid interpretations, because they probably are aspects of what he's writing, but it's not straightforward. It's not clear to me. There's not a single through line here. There's multiple inroads to this text, and you can especially apply that to his Batman run, which is just so dense. There's so much in there, and you mentioned earlier that he's delivered things which are a lot more concise and a lot more intelligible to the reader, and his All-Star Superman is exactly that. It is something which you can hand that book to anybody and they'll get it, they'll understand exactly what he was trying to convey to you. I don't know if you can do that with Wonder Woman Earth 1. I don't know if it has that communicable intelligence to it.
Well, the thing about it is, okay, I'm not even talking about the necessarily how difficult the work might be.
Sure.
Because the fact is, it's his difficult works that I actually like the best. I mean, my favorite book of his when I started was Doom Patrol.
Oh, yes.
It's just fucking weird and often quite incomprehensible, at least on the first reading. It's, okay, like, for instance, Nameless. I'm still fucking trying to figure that one out. But it's a fun figuring out. It's like, because I'm finding things there, and the thing is that it has a way of countering every single interpretation I try to put on it, because it's like, yeah, you just think that one thing's going on, and then like a page later you find out that actually it could be something different, or it could be any combination of these things. But the thing is that I see something here, kind of like with Mulholland Drive, a puzzle that I will figure out one day.
Yeah.
But there is something to chew on there.
Yeah.
And the Filth is the same, which is probably my favorite book of his, is the same way.
Yeah.
The Filth, I'm still finding things in the Filth that I didn't find the first time, but I did find, the thing is, there was a layer, and then another layer, and another layer, but the thing is that all those layers are still there. I'm finding more stuff on it.
Yeah.
And now, in the case of Wonder Woman Earth 1, I'm not sure how much there is there. Because I think I get the feeling that it's kind of like one of those, when you go to a gallery and you see one of these pieces of art that doesn't seem like much until you see the caption on the wall next to it, and it turns out that the caption is basically where most of the art is actually going on, because of the idea that it imposes on this seemingly ordinary thing, like reading it, which actually makes it more of a conceptual art, regardless of what it is. Now, the thing is, I'm getting the feeling that, I don't know, it just seems like there's a bit of hype going on here that it isn't really, I don't know. Maybe if it wasn't for the fact that the whole damn thing looks like pinups, I guess I would be seeing more of this in it, but it really seems to be more talking about being this thing than being the thing.
Back to Emmet and John in a moment. There are various interpretations of Wonder Woman coming out at the same time, but are the people working on these books the ones who are best suited for new takes on the character? Also, if the comics never explicitly state that Wonder Woman is bisexual, does that mean that she isn't? And more. Are you working on a comic or some other creative project? We'll include an ad for your comic in the show once a month while you're a patron giving at least $3 a month via Patreon. You'll be listed as a supporter and mentioned on the show on a rotating basis. Like John Alley, he's currently working on a comic called The Non-Scene, which we discussed in the June 29th, 2015 episode of Critiquing Comics. John writes, it's a story about a girl who learns to see invisible creatures by reading a mysterious book, more or less suitable for all ages. Find it at airbornecactus.com/comics.
This is an imaginary podcast, which may never have happened.
The Shortbox Showcase.
But then again may have. About a father and daughter. I'm Professor Allen.
And I'm Emily.
Who came from Ohio and talked about comics.
Walking Dead.
Tintin.
Black Lightning.
White Tiger. It tells of their rise to glory, when the great guests were yet to be booked.
Let's put it this way, Shogun Warriors wasn't going to win any Eisners.
And the great feats of editing not yet performed.
This is Ultra 7, this is Ultraman Jack, and this Ultraman Taro, and this Ultraman Leo, and this
of how they spoke at length.
This continuity is really the brainchild of nitpicking nerds the world over.
But to be fair, the best kind of confession is the Force confession.
And reviewed in brief tales that explore creatively the bounds of a given character's history.
Red Sun is wonderful with a very strange ending.
Of brilliant creators before their fall from grace. This is the era where Miller is at the height of his creative and artistic powers, and the ability of strong writing to encapsulate and transcend its time.
Flash of Two Earths by Gardner Fox.
This is an imaginary podcast. Aren't they all? Shortbox Showcase is part of the Relatively Geeky family of podcasts. Check us out on the web at relativelygeekypodcast.blogspot.com or search in iTunes for Relatively Geeky or Shortbox Showcase. And remember, we're not experts.
We're just family.
See, it's really fascinating to me that you brought up Kanigher, and we've talked about Marston and Peters and so on and so forth, and Martin Pascoe, give him another shout out. It's really interesting to me that we moved from an era where comic books were disposable. They were literally treated like trash, to an era where there's a lot of money to be made from comic books, and there's a lot of money to be made from them as potential springboards for movies and games and whatever else. And this is Wonder Woman is now being finally delivered to us as a cinema product. What I find bizarre about Wonder Woman Earth 1 is that it had to be Morrison and it had to be Yanick Paquette, because these are two of the top marquee names. So if we're going to do Wonder Woman, it has to be these guys who are at the top of their game in terms of their earning potential for DC. There's no way this is going to be given to a young, hungry artist who you probably found on Tumblr, who's doing lots of really interesting stuff, riffing on feminism and riffing on situations of growing up as a young woman today. There's no way that person was going to get this book. But maybe it should have been.
Oh, no, of course not.
I know, but this is it. Like, maybe it should have been someone like that, because then we would have got something really interesting from the idea of, okay, start from scratch, Wonder Woman, who is she to you? Whereas back in the day when these ideas first started, it was whatever could get out the gate on time. It was whatever you could actually produce to a deadline with the 5 other stories you had that week, and you're living in a sort of bizarre studio in New York with a whole other artist, and you can barely afford the heating bill. Like, that's where all these stories came from, these sort of low circumstances, and now we're talking about high end. All right, these guys are going to do the book and it's going to be great, but they're entirely unsuitable. Like, I'm not saying necessarily that Paquette and Morrison couldn't have done an amazing Wonder Woman book, but I'm saying there was almost this contractual obligation for someone in their bracket to do this book, and maybe it should have been someone who had something to prove. Like Morrison, the only reason Morrison made Nameless is because Morrison has a measure of success that allows him to do something that's completely inscrutable. Only someone with that degree of success can do Nameless. I can't do Nameless. You can't do Nameless, but he can do Nameless, and it's great work.
It's also a haunted house in space story,
yeah.
So that's marketable.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's going to be a movie at some point. Actually, it's interesting because Annihilator and that seem to go together, because Annihilator seems to be more about Morrison writing Nameless. It does. It really does. It seems to be like this is my thought process when I was writing Nameless, and here's the thing itself. But I guess it's just that I don't feel that Morrison has gained any greater insight into the character as a character. We still have all the same broad outlines of the Wonder Woman story. Pretty much, we hit the stations of Wonder Woman pretty much throughout, which of course he has to. But the thing is that DC's doing this like 3 or 4 times at the same time, because there's also Greg Rucka over on the regular book.
I was just going to bring
doing
this up,
the weird shit he's doing with that. Isn't Jill Thompson doing a book too?
She's done her own graphic novel, which I really meant to read for this, so we could have that contrast. An actual woman.
I want to read that. I want to read that a lot.
Here we go. Like, I'm starting from scratch with the character as well, and it's Jill Thompson. The Greg Rucka, Nicholas Scott, Liam Sharp book is really interesting, because Rucka's initial couple of issues were all about, all right, there's all these different versions of Wonder Woman out there, and now I'm going to try and talk about the fact that there's all these different interpretations of the character, and I have what I consider to be the definitive version of the character right here, and I'm going to walk you through all of this again. It's a very metatextual book.
Isn't that kind of what Morrison was doing with Batman?
Yeah, it is, because they're all true.
Everything?
Yeah, all the Batman stories are true, and then in the end he apparently could not actually deliver that, because he was going, it just doesn't make sense. Whereas I think Rucka has an easier time of it, because there's less investment in terms of the creative interpretations of Wonder Woman than there has been the creative interpretations of Batman. There are less versions of Wonder Woman out there, but even
they're all basically. I mean, they don't really go that far afield. It's just they differ in certain terms. And I guess the most fully realized one was, in fact, the one that Perez started.
Yeah.
I mean, because you had Rucka on that. You had Gail Simone, who was probably the best writer she's ever had on her. At the same time, during that era, you also had the early version of Mike Deodato's style with all these women with their strange hips. Their bodies always twisted and shit like that, and it was strange to have those two things together. But it's like the thing about her is that you're always starting over with her. I think partly because people up to a certain point don't really know what to do with her.
Yeah, it's a real shame.
You know, I mean, the thing is, it's okay when I'm sure that if I were to say to you, imagine a typical Batman story.
Yep.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
You'd be able to give me the broad outlines of that.
Yep.
A typical Superman story, perhaps. Now, what is a typical Wonder Woman story?
Yeah. I mean, I a few months ago, I think this was when Tom Taylor was doing research for Injustice. I imagine it was Injustice. And he put out a call.
I haven't read, by the way.
Yeah, I played the game. I think I read the first couple of runs on it.
Just to clarify whatever you're about to say to me, what exactly is the basic idea of Injustice? And what's the basic premise of that?
The basic premise of Injustice is that Superman did a bad thing and became a dictator. And in the video game, you've got Superman and his friends versus Batman and his friends, and they fight. So
is that Invincible?
Yeah. It's the idea of what if a superhero goes bad, and Tom Taylor was given the job of, all right, you need to set this up, so you need to actually kill off Lois Lane in this grotesque fashion, and then Superman loses his mind and becomes this dictatorial type. So you've got to basically tear down the Man of Steel, make him insane, and off you go. And great gig. And one evening, I saw this tweet, and it was, what is your favorite version of Wonder Woman? And I wrote back, and I said, I have always loved the idea of the Amazons having the purple ray technology and the invisible jet, and the fact that they were this highly technologically advanced society. They just liked wearing these smocks, and they liked wearing sandals, and they just enjoyed the ancient Greek aesthetic, but they weren't actually ancient Greeks. They just liked to role play as ancient Greeks. They were actually a highly advanced society, and that was the whole point. They were so far ahead of us that they could just play act these roles, and they're dressing up as deers and all that kind of stuff, while we were still having wars and having equality and injustice and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he wrote back to me, and he said, "Oh, wow, that's really old." Okay. So after, and then, no, to me, his response was, to me, she is the past, and Superman is the future. And I thought, there's the problem. Right there. That's the problem. She is seen as ancient Greece, old, in the past. She's mythical. She's not the future. She's not where women could go. She is some sort of closed off, marginalized. You got the Perez interpretation. These are all the reincarnated souls of rape victims. It's very much of the past. Whereas I think Morrison's original project was the future. This is what you should be. This is where we could be.
It was supposed to be a vision of utopia that men were supposed to be wise enough to submit to.
Yeah.
To understand that women understood it, and you should follow their lead.
Yeah.
Which valid idea. I certainly don't completely disagree with that at all. I'm just not sure how present it is in the work itself. I hear this being said by Morrison a lot. I see this being said by Morrison a lot. But at the same time, in the work itself, what I'm seeing is indulging in kink.
Yep.
and using this as an excuse for it sometimes. I mean, I just can't avoid. I've never been able to avoid that idea with any of those versions of her. And I mean, and then of course, bringing in the rape part. It's like, in both Perez and in Paquette, you have these eroticized poses with that Hippolyta at the beginning of Earth One, the way that she is there. I mean, that might as well be a John Willie drawing. And it's like I'm just sitting here going, it's just that, I mean, and the thing is that BDSM is not anti-feminist, and I'm not saying that it is, in case anybody's going to get out there and get mad at me for it. No, that's quite not at all. I'm not saying that. It's certainly very present in the lesbian community. Very much a trope there, if anything. It's just that, like I said, this whole thing really is through a straight gaze.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing about Wonder Woman is that the previous versions of her had a big appeal to girls, yes, but also gays in general, gay men and women. Well, I don't really see that this would, like, say if I were to hand this to a gay male friend of mine, he would put it down immediately.
There's nothing for him there? There's nothing for him at all?
It might as well be an issue of Maxim if you just leaf through it. I mean, it's like, I just can't avoid this. And like I said, on one hand, I enjoy looking at Paquette doing this. But, don't get me wrong, it's quite attractive. He does it very well. But given the purpose, I question that. And I just can't quite get away from that. And I guess I'm just wondering, like I said, what is a typical Wonder Woman story? What is she doing in such a typical story? I mean, it's like in Morrison, it was fighting some representative of the patriarchy. Probably the biggest example, although really the problem is there's only really one Wonder Woman villain that is looked at the same way as, say, the Joker would be, and that's the Cheetah. But there's Dr. Psycho.
Dr. Psycho, yeah, I was just going to say, sorry, the evil dwarf, yeah.
He's not, well, it's just that he's not very well known. He's not arch enemy material in that sense. It's like when people say, oh my God, Dr. Psycho is coming back. No one says that.
Well, Gail Simone, to be fair, did some great work with Dr. Psycho in, I think, Secret Six, or what became Secret Six, where she actually made Dr. Psycho this sadistic, quite evil character, but she also gave him a great sense of humor. So his wickedness is even more pronounced because he's shown to enjoy this, and enjoy it in such a way that it's almost subversive for the reader because he's being really funny about it. So she's sort of tapped into that. I mean, it's really interesting to make Dr. Psycho that when the Joker has gone so off the reservation in terms of being entertaining. Now he's just malevolent, that we can't relate to him at all.
The last time I saw him, half his face was gone, and you couldn't even look at it.
Yeah.
I mean, but at one point he had his face tied on, and I'm just sitting there thinking, I guess I kept thinking back to Peter Milligan's face. What about goddamn necrosis?
Yeah. It's not healthy, dude.
I mean, well, he should be dead. But I mean, and that face. I mean, I don't get away from that. Oh God, gross. Anyway,
I take your point about the villains. I absolutely take your point about the villains. And one of the few writers I thought who nailed the notion of Greek mythology being a threat that only Wonder Woman can defeat was Greg Rucka when he did the Medusa arc in his run. There's a moment where she's trying to get into the middle of a stadium for a highly televised event so that she can look into the camera and turn everyone watching the event into stone. I thought, that is genius. That is such an amazing idea. That confrontation between the modern world and the ancient Greek world, that we would see her and then we would become petrified and become stone. And I thought only Rucka has done something with the confrontation between the ancient world and the modern world in a way that I find not paying lip service to the Greek aspects of Wonder Woman. He's actually given it that twist that makes it something really cool. And you could introduce other sort of antagonists from Greek myth and maybe situate them in the world today and have them. And I think maybe that's what Azzarello was doing when he had all his takes on the Greek pantheon. I think that's what he was aiming for. But God damn it, that man likes his puns, and it just really pisses me off. I just can't help myself.
His take on the Greek pantheon reminded me a little bit of basically it made me think he was basically sort of kind of doing a Neil Gaiman with them,
yeah,
an American Gods kind of thing with them. I thought was Aegeus in particular with Ares.
Yeah.
In other words, rendering them in the terms that they would be in the ordinary world now. But it's one thing I've noticed that keeps happening here when you're talking about it is that when we're talking about the developed stuff for her, the most fully developed stuff, it seems to keep coming back to the post-crisis version that has been since abandoned.
Yeah.
The version that Rucka developed, that Perez developed, that Simone developed, that was more developed than any other version as a character, and as a universe, more developed than it, regardless of its bad moments, like the Cycle Shorts version, for instance. But the thing is that there seemed to be and I wasn't really a reader of the book, although I read the Perez version for the first 12 issues or so. And I did remember, by the way, that the idea of mythology being a threat was actually very present in it from the very start, because Ares was basically her arch enemy.
Yeah.
She was fighting him in this world.
Yeah.
But it seems that DC pretty much just abandoned. I guess Rook is trying to bring this back, but a very fully realized version of the whole thing. I mean, it was the first time, for instance, that it wasn't called Paradise Island, but rather Themyscira. And they went, and this whole idea of them being lesbian that everyone thinks is new, that was there.
Yeah.
That was already there.
I would argue that was there from the very start, but yeah, that is something which has been treated almost like you're just tacking this on, you're just trying to placate political correct view of the world. But no, that's implicit in the concept. It has to be. That has to be what was going, because human sexuality is pretty simple when you get down to it. If you got a group of people in one place, they're going to experience sexual desire and they're going to work it out. That is what will happen.
But my point is that it was the post-crisis version where it rather than being implicit, it became explicit.
Right. Yeah.
Actually stated.
Yeah.
And that's not new with Morrison. It's not new with Rucka. Well, not new with Rucka now.
Yeah.
Although I believe he's actually the one who brought it up originally in the previous iteration of the character. I guess it's just though that the character they can't stop doing iterations of her. They don't really differ that much from each other. I guess I'm just not sure what's so radical about Morrison's version, except that Morrison did it.
Yeah, and I think that was the point I was trying to make about the sense of obligation that you have to give a top tier character to a top tier creator. His name's on it. It's sold. I think it was a bestseller that month. It was one of the biggest books they sold that month. They've made their money.
Yes.
That's great. What do we have here? What actually is about? And I think you bringing up the idea of the lesbianism, I think that's a really interesting sort of angle on this, because there's this sense of ownership from fans over Wonder Woman, which is very literal. There's this you can't interfere with their understanding of her. So the Rucka's statement about, well, obviously she's bisexual, she has to be, upset a lot of people, and I saw a lot of discussion, a lot of fan forum discussion, a lot of discussion on Facebook, and a lot of people having a go on the Comic Alliance article, saying things like, well, if it's not on panel, if it's not actually been directly stated, it's not true. So
that's just absurd.
I know, but they they own her. She is theirs. This is their understanding of the character. Whereas you've got creators. Yeah, sorry.
I see. Well, I see a lot of this. Okay, quite often they'll also say something like, "Why can't this character, like say Superman, be lighthearted and for kids like he used to be, and et cetera, and et cetera?" and never ever change in any way. And I can sympathize with that. God knows, having sat through the New 52 version of Superman.
Yeah.
Okay, granted, but at the same time, what happens when those characters are that way, except for something special like All-Star Superman? If you make the mainline character that way, what happens is those fans go, that's taken care of, and then they don't read it. And then they stop selling, and they decide, we got to do something radical with the character, and then you piss off the fans who claim ownership all over again. They claim ownership, but at the same time, if the character is in this eternal form that they perceive it as, then they get bored and walk away. And so, not to sympathize with DC or any other major company, but what the fuck are they supposed to do, because they have to sell the shit. So they have to keep, when I look at DC and the way they deal with her, I swear to God, it seems like constant brand panic, because they really don't, they cannot find one coherent place to go with her, and yet like I said, there's not that much difference between any of these versions. It's just some of them are more worked out than others, so there's more detail than others. But, it's like she still pretty much stays the same almost all the time.
Yep.
And the broad outlines of her character are she's empathetic and she's a warrior. And sometimes she snaps people's necks.
But that's what's so fun about Rucka actually going, all right, I'm going to make this book about this confusion you all seem to be feeling, but I actually think there's a simple story here. And he's trying to boil it down to this concept of his character as she's a warrior, she's a diplomat, she's a poet, she's all these different things. She's a romantic, she's a pragmatist, blah 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 blah. But she's also a character. She's also somebody who has distinct feelings about the world, and she's not just an empty symbol. And he is one of the few writers on the character who, I think it's really interesting looking at Nicola Scott's work on the character, because she's drawing Diana's face with a softness. There's a softness of expression, which I think she's trying to convey something about Wonder Woman as a character that a lot of artists haven't. They want her to be beautiful, but they also want her to be strong, but they don't want her to look too butch. Cliff Chiang did a really good job of that, as you say. He presented her as this built woman who was stunningly beautiful. And I think what Nicola Scott's doing is she's focusing on her physicality. She's very much a fit woman. She's a character who looks, like a superhuman in contemporary comic book style, but she's got a softness around her features that I have not seen in Nicola's work prior to this, with maybe Black Magic, but I have not seen that before. And I wondered about that. I wondered about when I read the issues, I was going, why is this new? Why is her femininity being stressed in a way that feels to me new when she's been around for, it's her 70th anniversary, 75th year anniversary, something like that?
I believe she was first published in 1940. So
75. 76, yeah.
75, 76 years.
Yeah.
Like that. I'm pretty sure that her first All-Star Comics number 8, that might have been 1941, because I think the book was quarterly and it started in 1940, so possibly 1941. I'm not sure.
Yep.
But she's been around for a while.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, that DC would have dropped her long ago if it wasn't for that agreement with the Morrison estate that they had to publish her every month if they lose the rights.
Yeah.
So in order to maintain the brand, that's the only reason she was even published in the 50s.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like I said, you're seeing the character being publicly degraded by Kanigher the entire time, which again, psychosexually is quite disturbing. It's almost like 10 years of Dr. Psycho having her in his grasp. But it's actually, it seems to me that you could do an interesting Max Immortal type of story about the psychosexual relationship of these particular guys, Weisinger and Kanigher, to their characters during that time. and how these characters were basically something that they were torturing.
Yep.
That they were torturing. They were taking out their own frustrations on these characters. I think there's something to be said there about that, certain people's relationship with those kinds of characters when they work on them long enough. I mean, back then it was like a jail sentence, really, because it was degrading work that people didn't look highly on you for.
They wanted to be off writing a great American novel, and they're stuck writing the funny books.
Yeah, I mean, you see Kenninger sitting there with his pretentious little pipe.
Yeah.
And it's like God damn it, I'm a writer.
But it's so interesting to what you're sketching out there. It's so interesting to contrast their resentment of these fictional characters with, say, Greg Rucka saying, "Well, no, she's a feminist ideal. I'm going to use her to talk about issues of feminism." And then you've got Grant Morrison, who's like, "Well, I actually perform magical rites where I worship the Justice as literal gods." I pray to Superman, I pray to Batman, I pray to Wonder. They're his pantheon.
John Lennon really gave me that apple. God damn it!
So we've gone from
really. I ate it and it was delicious. I really, by the way, it's too bad that smartphones didn't exist there, because God damn it, I would have loved to have seen you take a fucking picture of that goddamn apple. Because I still do not believe him. I do not believe him. It's like he's great at hyping himself with this shit, but
But it is so fascinating that we've moved from writers chained to their keyboards to writers sort of taking these characters and going, "This is amazing, this is wonderful, oh my God, this is so important." It's a complete turnaround. But the characters haven't changed much, as you say.
Well, okay, so it's like here's the thing about like whatever kind of commentary Earth One is on feminism, or what it has to say about feminism. Okay, say you read somebody, you have somebody who's like, say, in a pre-feminist consciousness state.
Yep.
They pick this thing up. They read it. What do they get out of it? I'm not sure if they get that out of it. I think that they get, and they'd react to this one way or the other. Wow, those are some pretty pictures of girls. You see, that's the thing. I mean, and then there's just okay. Now, the New 52 version of Wonder Woman, quite famously, they hooked up with Superman.
Yep.
It was almost like they were really trying to de-lesbian her in a major fucking way while they were doing that.
Yeah.
I
think they'd read Larry Niven's Man of Steel, Woman of Kleenex and taken it a little too literally. That's my issue with it.
It was a weird thing.
Yeah.
It was a very weird thing. But the thing is that I don't think that DC does feminism very well outside of Vertigo. If Karen Berger or Shelley Bond.
Yeah.
Or someone like that were involved, yes. Over at Vertigo, yes. Quite different over at mainstream DC, and it's still the same. It's still the same. I mean, it's like just think of all the controversy, one way or another, that has occurred about Batgirl in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
For various reasons. There's, of course, the whole thing that basically finally got beaten down to a version girls can actually read. But there's also what they turned around and did with the Killing Joke. Yeah. Which is just hideous. DC doesn't do feminism very well, and the thing is, when they do it, really, this is, the more I think about it, the more patronizing this seems to me. This thing. I mean, it's like the whole flattering feminism thing that I was talking about. It just seems kind of patronizing. Like, feminism, wow, you're awesome. Seems to be the only real message about feminism that's occurred. Wow, girls being empowered and walking around wearing very little and not caring.
But
that's awesome.
Let's not actually discuss it as a force in our lives. Let's not actually apply it to circumstances that we recognize as our day-to-day existence. We're not going to talk about it. We're just going to assert it as a wonderful thing. And then that can go over there, that has its little place, that sits there taking notes, during the Justice Society of America's meetings, there's Wonder Woman taking notes. It's this wonderful sort of boxing in of feminist critique, but it's over there. We're not going to actually do anything with it.
I mean, the thing is, they're dealing with women in man's world, okay? Basically, it's like there's the holiday girls.
Yep.
But then there's also her little visit to the hospital.
Yeah.
Okay, now this reminded me of something I remember in the New 52, where she first appeared in that version of Justice League. I critiqued this at the time because it really just went, what the fuck? It was I called it the splash moment, where she buys some ice cream and her reaction is more or less, what is this iced cream that you speak of?
Yeah.
It's like she's some kind of fucking alien. And then here's her reaction when she sees all the women in the cancer ward in the hospital. And she just is overwhelmed by pity. It's almost a Buddha moment. That moment where he noticed there were sick people in the world.
Yeah.
And decides, fuck it, I'm going to meditate. But it's like, okay, now are there women that you can see in the world who are not either fat but proud, or just plain dying and pitiable? Are there no others in the world that we could possibly touch on in any way, shape, or form? I'm not sure exactly how you would plot that, given the outlines of this plot, and perhaps that's what's going to happen in the subsequent issues. But it seemed to me that, again, it's like, okay, oppression of women first of all, women dying of illness is not oppression of women. It's just women dying of illness. It has nothing to do necessarily with what the man's world has done to them. It's just that man's world has disease and doesn't have a purple ray. It's like, what's the message? Well, if we had a purple ray, women would be okay? I don't think so.
But isn't that the inspiration for her mission, that she needs to help man's world, because on her island she has this technology which we're told only works on women, and she is venting her anger at the doctor, saying, why can't you save them? Why are you letting them die? Why are you letting them decay? But that is actually her externalizing her own anger at, why did my mother and my people let this happen? Because we also have a moment where she sees in Hippolyta's mirror, we have glimpses of war. We have glimpses of a porn dungeon, of what looks like somebody in a not consensual bondage situation. So they are aware. They're aware of what's happening in the world, but they do nothing to help. They do nothing to go out into the world and sort of help these people. There is that. But I mean, it's like, where do you go with that, though? It's like she brings the purple ray and everyone's happy, and that's the end. I mean, it's like that can't be the case. I mean, I suppose you could do that in some things, but they do that all the time in the new Star Trek. But they just tend to ignore that they just basically made, for instance, traveling in spaceships redundant or something like that, or they ignore all the implications of their plot devices. That triple blood can bring people back, things like that. It's like, okay, now you've cured death. No, we didn't. It's like, so they can't do that. So what exactly is it that she's bringing to them if she's not bringing the purple ray? Yeah.
It's like it just doesn't seem like a fertile ground for plot. And it just, again, it seems to be about, hey, Wonder Woman, you're awesome. And we have nothing else to say about you or with you. And I just fear that that's where this is going to go. I'm not too fond of the other Earth ones, but at least you can say that they actually are distinctive takes on the character.
Yeah.
And this is just yet another rebranding of Wonder Woman.
Well, it's sort of interesting because it seems to fall in line with Amazon's attack and with Azzarello and Chiang's run on Wonder Woman as well, where the Amazons are actually presented as the real antagonists of Wonder Woman. So in Morrison and Paquette's book, we have all this suffering in the world, and we have all this inequality and whatever in the world that Steve Trevor alludes to. And Wonder Woman goes out into the world and she sees all this. She doesn't come to save our world. She's actually trying to break her world. She's breaking traditions. She's breaking the rituals. She's actually introducing people like Etta Candy and Steve Trevor to the other Amazons to say to them, you are wrong. We could be helping these people, or we could be living in a way that we could not. Any utopia depends on the exploitation of other people. Any utopia. There's no reason, there's no possible way for a society to have that level of perfection without something going wrong somewhere in the world. Just as we enjoy, you and I are conversing online via Skype in our sort of relatively comfortable existences, but there are people in the world who are completely deprived and have nothing to their name so that we can enjoy all these things. So I wonder if that's what he's getting at. But again, it's not actually, that's all I can take from it. Because that scene, you're right, that scene in the hospital makes no sense unless it's leading us to something. And all I can assume is it's leading us to the breaking of the Amazons. Like that they have to be expelled into the world and somehow make it better. But they have to learn what a life is, what a good life is, because they've just been dicking around for a couple of millennia, doing not much of anything from what we can see.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. 30 centuries of that, really?
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, are they actually a very stagnant society?
But we have the deer that tries to kill itself every 100 years or so. So there's this notion of depression. And Wonder Woman is saying, well, there's clearly something wrong, because this deer keeps trying to kill herself. And it's a woman deer. It's a female deer, sorry. It's doe deer, a female deer. Is trying to kill itself because centuries of this existence is boring. So I wonder if the DC edict is destroy the Amazons, because the only way we can make Wonder Woman interesting is to take away Paradise Island, Themyscira, whatever it is. That's the only way to make her interesting.
Well, that's what Azarella did, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he turned them all into stone.
You turn them all to stone. Basically, they want to blow up Krypton again. I wonder if that's what it is.
Right.
I wonder if that's the end goal. Because they don't know how to make it interesting.
Well, because, I mean, it's like there are two other major characters, both revolve around the loss of parents, whereas Diana, quite the opposite, could go and visit her mom anytime she wanted throughout her history.
Yeah.
And I don't know, does this go along with the idea that superheroes can't be happy? That I believe is an edict by, I think it's Azarello, Didio's edict, that they can't have happy personal lives. Was that him? Was that DC or Marvel? There was somebody.
I thought it was Marvel. I actually thought it was Marvel. I thought it was in relation to the Spider-Man marriage, but I'm not sure.
I think that's actually true. Yes, but I seem to recall. I'm just trying to remember, but there were some marriages that got destroyed precisely for that reason. I seem to recall that Didio says at least something similar, if it wasn't his. I don't know, but it seemed to be a similar edict, though. I don't know, but I don't know. I mean, do you believe that this is that one would be better served to read the Ruka book? Because the thing is, it's not getting as much hype.
Yeah,
but it seems to be doing something more substantial.
I think it's worth your time and money. I think people out there who are looking to get a good understanding of Ruka's appreciation of the character should read the Hecatea, which is his. It was a prestige graphic novel.
I've read that.
Yeah, I like that one a lot. I really enjoyed the Hecatea. I thought it sort of, again, it was Ruka confronting the modern world with the mythic world, and then the understanding of myth as the unfairness and injustice of this world being preserved in a myth, in a fairy tale, in a story, and it repeats. It keeps moving forward in future. He's a really interesting writer where it comes to Wonder Woman. I think he's got a very interesting handle on her. So if you want to be introduced to him, Hecatea is good. If you're looking for somebody who's doing some good work on the character, definitely check out the current run with Nicholas Scott and Liam Sharp and they're alternating on the book. So that it's a really interesting title at the moment. And also, of course, check out Sensation Comics. I mean, one of the things I did was I made a list of all the women.
I actually rather like that.
Yeah.
That's really more of your eternal Wonder Woman, the ideal Wonder Woman that you're dealing with. In other words, the Wonder Woman that everyone knows.
Yeah.
At least the broad strokes of. And the thing is, that's the other thing. With characters like this, isn't that somewhat the better way to go? Because, I mean, ultimately they always end up boiling back down to this anyway.
Well, this is where storytelling conflicts with the marketing plan. That in order to offload all these titles, all these characters have to interact, which means they all have to share the stage in some way. Which means you can't just send Wonder Woman off into the distant past to interact with Greeks for a couple of years. That might be an interesting story, but you can't do that because she needs to be present on the stage for when we're trying to sell.
See, that would be an interesting story because she's immortal and has been around for 3,000 fucking years, and you're not going into that?
I know, but you can't.
You know, it's like...
Yeah, this is the tension between a good idea and a marketable idea, which has to stand alongside all these other marketable ideas. So yeah, I think Sensation Comics was great because it was a showcase for a lot of women creators as well. A lot of up-and-coming women in the industry got to have their crack at the character. And I made a list of all the women who've worked on the book, either writers or artists. And you're talking about like maybe less than a dozen, closing in on 10, but not that many. A lot of them uncredited. And then from 2014 with Sensation Comics, all of a sudden the list just jumps. Like the number of female creators just skyrockets, and that's fantastic to see. And of course, it is in a version of Wonder Woman which is more universal. Let's just tell good stories about Wonder Woman. Let's tell good stories of this character, as opposed to, she has to appear in Justice League this week, and she has to appear in her own book this week, and she has to appear in Superman and Wonder Woman this week, and she has to, so you can't do anything that takes her too far out of that. There needs to be this sort of middle that she's constantly hovering around, which means potentially you don't get really good stories unless you've got a very skillful writer who can play that game and at the same time give you a good story. And Rook is an example of such a writer. He can do that. He can deliver that kind of story.
Well, I'm not sure if I have much more to say about her.
I think we have been going strong for almost 2 hours, and you, sir, have been very patient with me, so I think that's a good time as any to wrap things up. And absolute pleasure talking to you about the Princess of Power, Wonder Woman herself.
Yes, indeed. It's like, I guess I would just like to see a character that seemed to a version of the character that grips me. Because to be honest, I've never really been able to get into her either. Yeah. It's kind of like, I love Linda Carter as Wonder Woman. Okay, but try to actually watch one of the shows now, or even then, and it's like they're fucking awful. They're fucking awful, campy garbage. They follow the same fucking formula that any show like that did at the time. I mean, basically they have more or less the same formula as the Hulk. It's like somewhere around the half hour, you finally see her as the character, and then sometime toward the end, she's up as a character again. But for the most part, to keep the budget down, she's dressed normally and doing normal things, and occasionally there's things with sound effects. But it's just dreadful, awful dreck. But it looks good in stills. But that's because Linda Carter looks good. So, well, she does. Still to this day, which is kind of disturbing.
What a perfect note to end on. John, where can folks find you? Where can they find your work?
Well, they can find. I'm working on actually 3 separate things now. There's an adaptation of Wedekind's Lulu. There's Susie Spreadwell, and then there's Uncle Cyrus, and all 3 of those the most recent things that can be found in This Sickness number 8, which is available on Amazon and Comixology. It also has a number of other great creators like Emily Kaplan, Krista Wilde, Charles Alverson. Molly Keeley does a really amazing cover. And then you can also find on Amazon and Comixology the first volume of my adaptation of Lulu, What's Been Done Up to What You See in This Sickness. And my website is jlrobertson.org.
Excellent stuff. And if you want to check out more of my stuff, folks, I've just started writing comics of my own. I recently had a story in a British anthology called 100% Biodegradable, which you can find there. Otherwise, you can generally find me around the website Hopscotch Friday, and on Twitter I am EMMETOC_. Just to make things difficult for myself, I gave myself my own name and then threw in the underscore there. It's really hard to read out. Just, clever. I've really had fun talking about Wonder Woman. Cheers for joining me, John, and hopefully we talk to you again soon. Here. All the best.
Indeed.
Write us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com or look us up on Patreon, Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, and YouTube. All our social media links can be found on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. Also, please give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. Our theme is from bensound.com. Last Thursday on To the Bat Polls, Paul and I were joined by John S. Drew of the Batcave podcast to discuss Lorenzo Semple Jr.'s scripts for the Riddler and Penguin story arcs that began Season 1. What do they tell us about Semple's approach to the show, his ideas that were carried on by other writers, and those that ended up on the cutting room floor? Look up To the Bat Polls wherever you find your podcasts or at tothebatpolls.libsyn.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and please try to keep it to about 30 pages. Critiquing Comics is normally released on the second and fourth Thursdays of the month, but we're taking this week off for Thanksgiving. Next week on this show, an alien has taken a bite out of the moon and is threatening to do the same to Earth next spring if the middle school class he's teaching can't find a way to assassinate him first. Kumar and I discuss Assassination Classroom by Yusei Matsui. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.